Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is second bite at the cherry in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 81. There was a chill in the air. The onset of fall, the oncoming winter. Time was passing almost too quickly for Sakura's liking, and she lamented trading in short sleeves for a thicket coat. It'll be chilly up in Kumo, Karen told Sakura as she helped her onto one of the strange, automated carts she was so proud of owning. Not as chilly as Iwa, I'd imagine, but they built their city on ocean cliff sides, so it won't be warm. Any advice for dealing with the rakeage? Be honest and straightforward. He's the kind of guy that'll see right through your bullshit. Don't embellish and don't promise him anything you can't follow through on. That was easy enough. Sakura had learned by now that most Kage had a similar mindset. It was possible it was even a requirement for the occupation. Maybe Orochimaru had liked playing word games, but Tsunade sure didn't, and Oniki had valued honesty from her, day one. Still, Sakura felt like every village she'd been to had held a new challenge. Other than you, she'd pretty much almost died in every other village's borders. It was, kind of a worrying trend, now that she thought about it. I'd imagine the difficulty will be getting Kumo and Konoha to get along. Sai explained to them, raising his voice over the loud starting of the cart's engine. One of Kumo's representatives tried to run off with Hinata over a decade ago, after all. Bloodline theft. Karen shook her head. Every village shits on it, and every village is more than willing to do it if they think they can get away with it. There's some later amendments to the pact that deal with bloodline theft specifically, Sakura pointed out. But to be honest, that's mostly a Konoha addition. What other village has shinobi whose Kekii Genkai can be stolen? There's got to be more. Konoha can't be the only one. Sasuke, come on, aren't there Uchiha branch-offs somewhere? The old Sasuke might have gotten testy at the mention of his clan, but Sasuke now merely shrugged. I'd have to look at family records, but nobody ever mentioned it to me. Look at Naruto and Karen. Sai pointed out. Both Uzumaki, other sides of the world. Yeah, but the Uzumaki got invaded and pissed on years ago, we had to scatter for our safety. Karen retorted. We were too awesome to have our own village. All the other villages got jealous. Still, if the Uzumaki are everywhere, the Uchiha might be as well. And the Hyuga? Less likely. They're a bit more possessive over the Byakugan than the Uchiha were in their prime. Otherwise Kakashi would never have been allowed to keep his. Kakashi was given his as a dying wish. I think it would have been tasteless to take it from him at that point, it would have been after he'd had it for the latter part of a war. Sakura replied. It wasn't bloodline theft in his case, more like a bloodline gift. And he can't pass it on genetically or anything like that. That might not be true. Everyone looked to Sasuke, both curious and amazed that he'd spoken up. One's genetics can be altered over time due to environmental factors, and it can affect offspring. It's possible a Sharingan implant could do the same. Sasuke looked over at the baffled group, turning slightly red as he did. I do pay attention when Orochimaru lectures. He's a bastard, but he's smart. Sakura couldn't help but giggle at that. It was cold, but she felt warm with this group, chatting with Karen as though they'd known each other forever. She thought briefly that Karen and Ino might get along swimmingly. And seeing Sasuke now, more like how he was before that day he'd fought with Itachi, stoic, but involved, offering his 2 cents when he felt it necessary, sometimes flustered, sometimes confident and cool. It really was true that Oto had been the right place for him. Sakura still hated to admit it, but she liked this Sasuke. And even with Orochimaru there, even with Itachi still naturally on the boy's mind, Sasuke was going to be okay. It was a weird weight off her shoulders that she hadn't realized she'd still carried. Sasuke was going to be okay. Naruto was going to be okay. Sai and Gaara were with her and well. Maybe she hadn't gotten Oto on the treaty, but she'd made connections, and, well, Orochimaru was calling her a friend, so that counted for something. Karen had offered to drive the 3 of them to the border, and from there they'd be on their way to Kumogakure. It was a long drive, however, and Sakura was still exhausted from her fight with Sasori. Instinctively, she went to touch the scroll at her hip, the one Sai had given to her to safekeep before they left. It was a little hard to believe that they'd sealed a person in there, but Sasori really had done everything he could to ensure he was as far from mortal as he could get. She didn't think he'd suffocate or die in there, he had to be fine, right? She still had no idea what they were going to do with him, but she had him nonetheless. It was crisp out, yes, but she allowed herself to lean on Gaara's shoulder and close her eyes despite the cold, letting the chatter of the conversation around her fade into the background. If they had a long trip ahead of them, she could afford to let herself get a few winks. Admittedly, the rumble of the cart beneath her was soothing. She usually couldn't tell quite when awake bled into sleep. Even Jashin scent dreams tended to bleed into her consciousness slowly, until she realized all at once she was having one. Not this time. Sakura was thrust into a vision quickly, like being dunked into cold water. She felt fear before anything else, and a tightness at her throat as the life was slowly choked out of her. I knew this damn organization would get me killed. The thoughts forced themselves into her head, not hers, but she wasn't sure whom just yet. Her eyes opened, and she saw the strangest man she'd ever seen with his hand at her throat. His hair was a vibrant orange-red, and there were thick piercings all over his face, through his ears, nose, everywhere. No, piercings wasn't quite right. It was more like someone had shoved half a dozen metal rods into the man's face and he'd decided he'd rather not take them out. There is a traitor in our midst, Deidara. The man spoke. I have learned of this, and then you return to me to tell me that Sasori is somehow dead and you have fled without any further information. Give me one good reason I shouldn't believe you haven't been the one ratting to them when my back was turned. How the hell would I even have managed without Sasori finding out? No. Deidara sputtered, finding it difficult to speak with a hand around his throat. But why would Jashin show her Deidara now? Unless this was the leader of Akatsuki. Her first glimpse of the man who called himself Pain. Apt name at the moment, considering how Deidara felt. The man had a grip. His eyes, though, those were the most striking features. Deidara naturally avoided looking directly at them, but every now and then Sakura caught a glimpse of the strange ringed pattern. Some sort of Kekkai Genkai, it had to be, but what? We are all aware of the reluctance in which you joined this organization. You're long distance, capable of delivering a message. You thought Harano would be your way out. Fuck off, you know I'm not that stupid. And there was no way I was taking on a dozen shinobi including a Jinhuriki without Sasori to back me up. Sakura's world seemed to upheave, and Deidara was thrown to the ground unceremoniously. She felt him cough, surely his neck would bruise from that kind of treatment. So Pain was a man who led by fear foremost. She could have guessed that, but the more pressing concern was, of course, that Pain had learned about a traitor, which meant that Haiden was in danger. But how? How could he have possibly found out? As far as Sakura was concerned, their communication methods might as well have been telepathy. Deidara looked up just as Pain put a boot to his chest. Deidara kept his gaze to the side, again very purposely avoiding direct eye contact. Something about eyes that needed it to work, perhaps. Or maybe Deidara was just paranoid. Either way, Sakura found herself wishing he would just look a little longer. You've hidden it well, Deidara, but you can't hide it anymore. I can see her chakra in you. Wait, what? Her chakra? Fuck, he was a sensor type? And he could see when she connected to someone else? I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Deidara protested. Are you saying they left a tracker on M-? His voice was cut off as Pain pressed down with his foot, squeezing the air out of his lungs. You cannot hide from God. Pain told him. Not forever. The truth will always reveal itself, with time. I should have known you were too much of a risk from the beginning. The foot pressed harder, and Sakura knew Deidara was running out of breath. Pain was going to kill him unless someone intervened, maybe if she cut the connection? But no, he'd already gotten his confirmation that Deidara was in league with her. What could she do? Connect to Haiden somehow? But what if he was nowhere near them? The pressure was becoming too much, and Sakura felt Deidara moving a hand towards the pouch on his hip in self-defense, only to be kicked away by. Wait, a second man? The man also had the orange-red hair, also had the metal rods pierced through his face. But his hair was longer, The face different, what did it mean? Two similarly adorned men? Pain was just supposed to be one man, so were these servants instead? You could have seen this world to a new order, Deidara. You could have been a part of it. Now, the only world you'll know is one of pain. There was suddenly a bigger pressure, far more than the one brought about by the man's foot. It was as if gravity doubled, a weight so tremendous that Sakura could almost feel Deidara's body cracking under it. She wanted to scream, wanted to fight back, but she was trapped looking through Deidara's eyes, and the man was helpless. Why would Jashin force her to sit through this? Seconds passed, but it felt like minutes, so long that she didn't know how Deidara was still conscious. She knew getting thrown against the hard ground hurt, of course it did, but this? Slowly and methodically being compacted into it? Pain, pain, pain. Nagato, stop this. A woman's voice rang out, and the pressure lifted all at once. Sakura felt Deidara cough once again, body aching from whatever attack pain had inflicted upon him, but there were black spots in his eyes and he couldn't quite see who his savior was. Still, the voice was familiar, Sakura realized, and there was only one woman in Akatsuki. He is not the traitor, Nagato. I am. Konan's voice was muffled, Deidara's ears ringing as he struggled to stand, to flee if he could manage. Everything hurt, and it took all of Sakura's will to focus on the conversation happening nearby. LD betray me, after everything. You've changed, Nagato, you're not the man Yahiko and I would have followed. You're sitting here using his body as a puppet. Nothing was making sense. Konan wasn't the traitor, it was Haiden, so why was she covering for him? Sakura needed to connect with Haiden, but she didn't want to leave Deidara now, not when he was so vulnerable. She couldn't do anything but she could at least be here. He should have stayed, she thought to herself. No, wait, he was thinking. I should have stayed with them. At least I would have died with a fellow artist. He coughed again, this time with flecks of blood appearing on his hand. Pain had crushed his lungs. This was bad. As Deidara's vision began to bleed back in, Sakura saw a brief glimpse of the two men bickering with Konan, snippets of a conversation she wished desperately she could hear more of. You've let that man poison your mind, and now you're turning on your dash. Enough, Konan. There was a rumble, and Deidara began to sprint as small rocks fell from whatever ceiling was above them. He's pissed, I need to run, need to get out of here quick. Deidara ran and ran and ran, and Sakura awoke with a jolt, clinging tightly to Gaara's arm as the cart hit a bump on the road. She was hit with the sudden relief of no longer being connected to Deidara's pain, and yet the fear of not knowing what exactly had happened to them. Whoa there, chill out, just a bump. Karen was saying to her, laughing slightly. You were out, I can't even believe you can sleep that well on one of these. Ha, right, sorry. Sakura tried to hand-wave the subject away. She hadn't mentioned her visions to anyone in the Oto group and hadn't planned on it. Jashin's secrets were to remain with his followers, and her two companions, of course, who had lived for some time in the Enclave anyway. They could tell she'd had a vision, of course, she could see it in their eyes and the way Gaara gave her hand a comforting squeeze. What worried her, though, was the concerned look on Sasuke's face, like he knew something had bothered her beyond just a bump in the road. He'd always been perceptive, but it wasn't as though he could just deduce her visions were a thing. He was probably just concerned. Either way, Sakura couldn't let herself nap again now, not without potentially attracting a little more scrutiny from her current company. She just had to hope and pray that Deidara had made it out of there alive, and Konan, too. Oto bordered the land of hot water, and on the other side of Yugakure lay the border between hot water and lightning country. Since Oto was on good terms with Yu, that meant Karen could take her automated carts through hot water to the lightning border. A small part of Sakura wanted to return to the Jashin Enclave, if only because a soak in the hot springs sounded so good as the temperatures around them began to drop, but it was quicker to swing north and keep straight for Kumo. Even with the steady pace of the carts, it was a good day and a half before they reached the border. There were no Kumo shinobi patrolling there, not visibly anyway, and Karen insisted this was normal. They don't expect invaders to push through hot water without their hearing about it first. Other than that, it's just us that comes to the border recently anyway. There's more patrols on the border with Water Country. Sakura was grateful to put her feet on solid ground. She'd grown restless with sitting about, and there was a pit in her stomach that had been growing since her vision of Deidara that pressed her to move more quickly. She'd almost asked the group to turn around, to head towards a Megakure instead, but what could she have done? With allies, she could take on 2 Akatsuki members, sure. But the leader, along with who knew else, and all of the AIM shinobi loyal to him? She'd need an army to rescue Konan and Deidara at this point. She had to trust that they'd either find a way out or... She didn't want to consider the alternative yet. No, the best she could do was press forward and get Kumo and Kiri in on the treaty. With the 5 biggest shinobi countries aligned, Akatsuki would be at a major disadvantage, no matter who they held in their corner. Thanks for the ride, Karen. Sakura gratefully offered the girl a hand. And, well, everything else. If you ever do get that Otokage mantle, you know how to reach me. It'll be the second thing I do. Karen promised. After dumping Orochimaru's body into a ditch, of course. It was more bittersweet when she turned to Sasuke, and Sakura realized that there was a high possibility that she may not see him or Karen again. They had Orochimaru to overthrow, and after that, Sasuke was no doubt set on seeking out Itachi. Sakura hoped beyond hope that they wouldn't kill each other, not after they'd been manipulated and forced through so much, but... Well, Itachi had tortured Sasuke. Taken away his family. Joined an organization set on obtaining Baijuyu and invoking a new world order. Sakura certainly wouldn't blame Sasuke for still wanting to take his brother down even after getting answers, and if it came to a fight, she wasn't sure who'd win. Good luck. She told Sasuke. With your brother, I mean. Whatever happens. Sasuke was silent for a moment, meeting her eyes in an expression Sakura didn't quite understand. Then, he smirked somewhat, putting a hand on his hip. Not going to try and stop me this time. Sakura laughed. Please. Believe it or not, I can learn a lesson. Anyway, you deserve answers, and Itachi needs to give them. Sasuke nodded at this, and Sakura was sure that would have been the end of their goodbye. But, well. This was her old teammate, after all. She moved forward and hugged him. Not as desperately as she had in the Forest of Death, not with the passion of a girl with an unreasonable crush. As a friend, to a friend, grateful that she'd found him alive and well and better off than she'd hoped. Be careful. She begged. Promise me. It was several seconds before he answered, and for the first time since she'd ever known him, he reciprocated the gesture. I promise. The rain was soft but icy as it fell down, and Sakura was eternally grateful for Gaara's sand and its ability to form a fairly protective umbrella over them. Thunder rumbled across the sky but they saw no lightning yet. Sakura told herself it was likely only a matter of time. Sai was antsy, though Sakura was sure only she and Gaara could possibly tell. The boy had retreated to his more stone-faced demeanor when she'd told him of Deidara, and she knew that Sai blamed himself for not doing better at convincing Deidara to join. She tried to reassure him that there was a good chance Deidara wasn't dead yet but, well, Root seemed to push out eternal pessimists. There had been no visions since, which was unusual. She had gotten so used to the nebulous dream about the man writing the letter that it was almost strange to not see it when she closed her eyes. Whatever was happening, that Jashin had nothing to show her only made the knot in her stomach grow. The only good distraction she had from her thoughts was watching Emi play in the rain. Wherever the Tanuki was from must have been drier than here, though she could have sworn that Taki's forests at least had regular rainfall, or perhaps the animal simply enjoyed rain. Either way, a cute animal was at least once good thing they had in their life presently, and Sakura clung to the Tanuki's happiness in an effort to bolster her own. Kumo hasn't sent anyone to kill us yet. She pointed out with a grin, trying to lighten the boy's mood as they walked. So that either means they don't know we're here yet or they're amicable to us paying a visit. Kumo's quite deep into lightning country. It may be a couple days before we even reach the city border, let alone see any shinobi. True. But it's odd. Sakura put her hands together, sending out a sensing pulse. All she could sense were herself and the boys. There's nobody around for a pretty good distance. You'd think they'd at least have some light border patrol, even if they don't expect anyone but Oto and you traders. Something's off. Gaara replied. Even Suna has light patrols on the desert borders, despite the harsh weather. So much for lightening the mood. Sakura made her sensing pulses more regular, scanning the immediate area but coming up dry. With the rain dulling their senses, it put her even more on edge. Kumo, it hadn't been attacked, had it? There was no way a village could be under duress without its neighbors knowing about it. No, that couldn't be it, it had to be something else. Emi growled, stopping at a dead halt at something she'd no doubt smelled ahead. The trio halted in turn, but as Sakura sent out another pulse. Nothing. She insisted. Nobody with chakra is even remotely near us yet. Gaara took the lead, sand at the ready as they moved further down the road. Then, a splash of red caught Sakura's eye, off the road and in the nearby brush. A corpse, bled out and riddled with holes made by weapons unknown. Another corpse was hung in a tree, impaled on branches. Both were wearing Kumo headbands. The border patrol. At first, Sakura put a hand to her mouth, worried for whatever had sought to kill Kumo shinobi in their own borders. But the way that first corpse looked reminded her of something ritual, something methodical. Fucking Haiden. The words left her mouth, as did a good portion of her anxiety. Alright, so the idiot was here doing ritual work for Jashin on some unfortunate patrol, probably because he'd been sent by Pain to investigate the two Jinhyuriki living here. Him and Kakuzu. She could handle them. At least she knew for a fact that one of them wouldn't be out to kill her. In a way, she was excited. She hadn't seen Haiden in person for over a year now. He certainly knows how to leave a mess. Sai critiqued as he examined the bodies. And Kumo's going to be pissed when they find out. Time to go play damage control, Sakura admitted. She wasn't going to pretend the loss of life here was unnecessary, but Haiden was attempting to maintain his cover. He couldn't exactly play pacifist in front of Kakuzu without raising eyebrows. Though if she was being honest, he'd probably enjoyed the scrap. The bodies weren't exactly fresh, but they weren't old either. They weren't far behind. If they quickened their pace, they could catch up with the two easily. Make their offer to Kakuzu, reconnect with Haiden, and if all went well turn them around and finish the journey to Kumo before anyone got hostile. Out of habit, Sakura sent out a sensing pulse, bigger this time, and though it hurt her brain to reach further out, maybe she'd catch them in the periphery of the radius and know what direction they needed to head. She caught a single response, so far at first she almost missed it. After a second pulse, however, the response was way closer, and big. Gaara big. Jinhyuriki big. Oh, shit. She cursed aloud. They've engaged a Jinhyuriki? Pain must have ordered them out here to collect while Sasori and Deidara dealt with us. Sai deduced. Where at? Heading our way, fast. Sai had already pulled out an empty scroll and ink, and Sakura's hand reached for the three-pronged kunao Kakashi had given her. The Jinhyuriki was likely to be panicked if they'd been attacked by Akatsuki, and as far as she knew Kakuzu was likely to come in swinging. There was a fight ahead, and a crash, and suddenly a woman barreled through the brush towards them. It was only by the grace of Gaara's sand that she didn't knock them over, though despite that Sakura was sure the impact with the sand had to hurt. There was a chakric aura around the woman that was visible to the naked eye, a dark blue color, and her fingernails had elongated into what looked like sharp claws. Her light hair and skin was a novelty for Kumo, as far as Sakura was aware, and she couldn't help but feel as though the woman exuded a sort of feline energy as she pushed away from the sand and took on a defensive stance. Wasn't the Matatabi supposed to be feline? And by all accounts, it was Kumo that had taken possession of the cat by Juyo last. The woman growled as she looked them over, almost feral in her stance, until she looked to Gaara and sniffed the air towards him. Tanuki! She hissed. You're the Ichibai. Good nose. Sai commented. You look as though you could use a hand. You're offering. I've got some leverage on the men chasing you. Sakura explained. Get behind us. Gaara's sand is a good shield, and if negotiations go bad, he can run you back to the village. The woman hesitated, sniffing the air once more, but whatever hesitations she had were dismissed by the sound of footsteps in the distance. With a dexterous leap, she weaved between Gaara and Sakura until she was standing behind them both. "You'll be a meat shield, if nothing else," she determined. Well, that was good enough for Sakura. Now it was time to put her preparations to the test. Time to see if she had any sway over Kakuzu's allegiances, or if it was going to come down to a fight. Fortunately for her, it was Haiden that crashed through the brush first, skidding to a halt as he realized there were more shinobi in front of him than he'd originally be pursuing. He looked disheveled, scratched up, no doubt from the woman's claws, but certainly not shaken up about it. In fact, he looked a bit manic as he scanned the area, grinning from ear to ear until he caught sight of Sakura. Confusion, and then a certain smug grin replaced the mania. "Well, hey there, Pinky. Been a while, hasn't it?" Chapter 82, Arbitrium, Intermission Part 12. The sound of chirping crickets was the only thing that reached Sasuke's ears as the four of them moved through the field. Silence was key, the fewer people they alerted to their actions, the better. At this point, most of Otogakure had sworn some sort of secret allegiance to Karin, but they still couldn't trust everyone, and there were definitely plenty still loyal to Orochimaru. The less potential fighting they had to do before reaching the finale, the better. Admittedly, Sasuke still couldn't wrap his head around challenging Orochimaru, not after so long studying under the man's wing. Even with his handicap, the man was formidable. Sakura had healed his arms, sure, at the cost of his legs, but he didn't need legs to cast jutsu. The only true disadvantage Orochimaru had now was mobility, and Sasuke was more than certain it was less of a hindrance to him than it would be to others. In another time, in another life, he might have been tempted to try this alone. But that wasn't him anymore. "He's in the southern base for sure." Karin spoke quietly, calling them to a halt just outside the entrance. Though there were plenty of labs in Otogakure proper, Orochimaru did much of his research within the privacy of a locked laboratory to the south, one that originally only he and Kabuto could access. Now, with Kabuto gone, it would only be Orochimaru in there. What kind of idiot is he, going down there alone? He always talks about how he knows we wanna kill him. Suijutsu bared his teeth, pointed and sharp, at the mention of the snake. "Think it's bait? Himself as bait? Wouldn't put it past him," Karin admitted. "He's cocky enough to try it. But he's been acting weird since." She didn't have to say it. They all knew. In the few days since Sakura had come and gone, Orochimaru had been strange. It was as if he'd given up the concept of being a Kage entirely. Karin had been managing village affairs entirely on her own, and Orochimaru had instead spent his every waking hours in one laboratory or another, not speaking with anyone. They'd originally planned on waiting a bit longer to challenge him, but at this point Karin was already becoming Otokage in everything but name. If they didn't move to figure out exactly what Orochimaru was up to, the village might just up and revolt against him before they could. "Caution," Jugo advised, to the point as always. He had a calm exterior, but Sasuke could sense the boy's chakra riling beneath the facade. The only reason he hadn't gone berserk was due to the threat of Sasuke's Sharingan, something Jugo both loathed and appreciated all in one. The damage Orochimaru had done to him with his experimentation was severe, most of all on his psyche. The raging had been a curse Jugo had dealt with prior, due to the nature of his abilities, but Orochimaru's poking and prodding had only seemed to worsen the effect. As much as anyone, Jugo wanted the snake dead. It likely wouldn't bring the boy much peace, but any bit counted in Sasuke's book. He understood vengeance as well as anyone could. "We need to open the door first. Suijutsu, think you can goop your way in?" Suijutsu rolled his eyes at Karin's terminology, but didn't protest. His body's unique ability to quite literally turn into water was useful for more than just water fighting. It was also quite the decent infiltrative skill when one could just liquefy and pour themselves under the crack of a door. Most security seals were triggered if a door was breached or opened a wrong way. This way, Suijutsu didn't need to do either. And opening a door from the inside didn't tend to trigger seals either. Moments later, a clang and a creak indicated to the rest of the team that the door had opened without a fuss. Swiftly they made their way inside, stopping periodically for Karin to sense ahead for seals and traps, most of which tended to use chakra to activate. There were, however, manual traps still, and Sasuke knew that Orochimaru wouldn't half-ass anything if he intended to keep people out, especially people like Karen with their own methods of seeing chakra. But as they went further and further in, nothing. Nothing at all. I don't like this. Karen hissed. It's too easy. There's no way he'd let it be this easy. Where's he at? Just behind the door. Sasuke had an inkling. An idea. He hated to say that in his time here he'd grown to know Orochimaru well, but he couldn't deny it. The man had insisted on being a part of his life, on cultivating his growth, his perfect vessel. So Sasuke in turn had learned of him, that the man didn't just forget things, every action he took was deliberate. Calculated. Planned. Orochimaru hadn't left things unguarded by accident or misstep. He intended for this group to reach them. Despite Karen's protests, Sasuke straightened up from his crouched position and opened the door. Ah, Sasuke. You're early. Orochimaru was seated at a desk, facing the door, though he did not look up from his writings as Sasuke entered. He merely gestured with a hand. Come in, all four of you. Maybe I was wrong. Suijutsu commented, his hands reaching for a short sword at his hip. Maybe he did forget we wanted to kill him. No, I have not forgotten. But we can talk, first, can we not? Orochimaru's eyes met Sasuke's own, and he could tell that the man was sincere, at least as sincere as he was capable of being. But for the life of him, he could not tell what Orochimaru was up to. A bargain? Orochimaru was good at that. Good at bargains and pleas. But there was really only one thing he had to bargain with at this point. The title of Otokage. You can have it, Karen. Orochimaru stated as she entered. No need for such a fuss. I used to put a lot of weight on titles, you know. I created the Sound Village as a tool to challenge my old sensei, and as a resource to be able to continue my research. I relished in the weight and responsibility of being a Kage. What I was denied in Konoha. He continued to write as he talked, seemingly nonplussed by the four of them leaking killing intent into the room. But, what will being Kage do for me, in the long run? I've thought long and hard about it. I've decided I no longer have need to immerse myself in village politics. I have far greater ambitions than that. So you're just abdicating? I find that hard to believe. Karen folded her arms. And there's a lot of people who still want you dead even if you do step down. Suijutsu grinned. I still wanna stab you. You kept me in a bloody tank dash. Yes, and... Psychopath. Karen muttered. If you are abdicating, what makes you think I'll just let you stick around? I don't want my village on edge, worried about if you'll abduct them in the night for some twisted shit. Every village has its shadows. Every community has its dark little secrets. You're more than aware by now, aren't you? Orochimaru glanced towards Sasuke briefly, and Sasuke felt his heart wrench as he remembered what Sakura had told him. Danzo. Itachi. My entire clan. We're going to change things. He replied, and was surprised to find that he meant it. No more shadows. No more secrets. Are you as naive as Haruno? There will always be secrets. Orochimaru countered. She didn't tell you everything she's learned. Where she learned it, and why. And I have not told her everything of the Sharingan. These are not the secrets of which I speak. Not at a glance, but in the end, does it not intrigue you? How she was able to uncover the truth of your clan when you could not. It did intrigue him. But right now, it didn't matter. Because Orochimaru was also hiding something. Dancing around it. He didn't need whatever mystical force Sakura had to see the patterns here. Sharingan users had always been able to see patterns, to analyze and copy the world around them with inhuman precision, to look underneath the underneath. Kakashi-sensei, what do you think of the three of us, now? If you saw me here, would you still be disappointed? And Sakura? He remembered her warmth. Remembered her holding him close. Listening. Understanding. Seeing what he could not. He didn't realize how far behind her he'd gotten. She got under your skin. He finally put it together, everything clicking into place at once. Many had said he and Orochimaru were alike, and if that were true, then so was this. She healed your arms without demanding anything in return, and you can't handle that. You can't handle that someone can be so selfless and so strong all at once. There was more to it, he was certain, but he could only guess as he had not been privy to their private conversations. Still, knowing what he did know of Sakura, Sasuke had a feeling. She's made you question everything. Why you're doing all this? She could make or break you in a heartbeat, and you're still trying to figure out how. Insolent child. Orochimaru hissed, his voice suddenly dark. Which meant Sasuke was onto something. Of course, he was close. Don't presume that a single girl could influence me so. She has already received compensation for her healing dash. No, you gave her compensation. She never expected it. Never demanded anything from you. She's uniting the shinobi world while you sit here playing at immortality, and you just can't stand that. Despite everything, she's becoming more of a name than yours will ever be. There was another hiss, and a flash of motion as snakes lunged forth and clashed against the steel of Sasuke's blade. His Sharingan whirled, and his counter to Orochimaru's attack was effortless. Or was it, perhaps, that the man's heart just wasn't in it? I used to be afraid of you. Sasuke admitted aloud, tempering the quiet tremble in his voice that had grown with his heated emotions. I used to think you were some invincible force. Some demon that would forever haunt me, even as you whispered in my ears that you could give me everything. I think for a minute I even believed you. He cut through the last of Orochimaru's snakes, sheathing his blade as he turned his back on the man who was once his mentor. You're just as human as the rest of us. A piece of his mind seemed to fall apart at the seams. The piece that had held up Itachi in his heart, his nightmare, his enemy, his brother, his everything. Itachi, a boy who had been ordered to kill his family and hadn't thought twice. Just as Sasuke hadn't thought twice about leaving his own family behind. If our places had been switched, would I have broken too? They were all human, weren't they? All of them. So fallible and frail. Where was the strength he'd used to see in them? Where had it gone? Had it ever even been there? Sasuke. Karin's voice reached him in the dark of the room, an anchor against his own thoughts. An anchor to the realization. Orochimaru was so very alone, and he was not. Orochimaru was weak. Itachi was weak. Sasuke would not be. Lady Otokage. Sasuke gave a small, cheeky bow of his head to Karin. Leave him. There's nothing he can do to us and he knows it. He walked away, somehow the easiest decision he'd ever made, and his friends followed without another word. Oniki had once said only fools dedicated their life to art, and Deidara was starting to suspect he was right. After all, what kind of idiot would go back to face a rampaging god after he'd already escaped once? Some people had made the assumption that Deidara wasn't a man of honor, but that was more because he hadn't really deemed anyone worth the effort. He still wasn't sure if it had been worth going back for Konan, but she had essentially offered up her life in place of his own, and, well, look, it was from one artist to another, and that was all that needed to be said of the matter. Not that he really considered paper folding an art, not initially, but after seeing Konan pull out what was the equivalent of a C3's worth of paper bombs out of her sleeve, he couldn't really deny that she at least had talent. If she was willing to take out a block of her own neighborhood to save his sorry skin, he could at least try to do the same. And look, he hadn't really expected his C4 technique to do any damage to Pain, but it had been a good enough distraction while he'd squirreled Konan out of there. Still, if he ever did get a chance to find out how the man had survived microscopic bombing. He fucking hated the Akatsuki, and he definitely hated Pain. And he threw another curse at Itachi for good measure, for getting him into this mess. He'll find us, Konan gasped, blood tinged on her mouth as she held together a gaping wound in her side. We can't outrun him. If I can outrun the Tsuchikage, I can outrun that piece of shit. Deidara countered. Still, he urged his clay mount onwards. Normally he'd have preferred a winged mount, but those were easy to spot. He'd elected for a lupin shape instead, something speedy and easy to ride. He'd sent out 4 more, each with clay clones of the 2 of them, hoping beyond hope that they might distract Pain even briefly. As much as he postured, Oniki was old and had a soft spot for him. He was half convinced the old grump had let him go. Konan coughed, and Deidara could have sworn he felt her body getting colder. She was losing blood. He needed a healer. He also needed to go somewhere Pain wouldn't expect. Not IWA, even with Onaki still in charge, that was too obvious. And he couldn't bring Pain's wrath down on his old home, not after seeing what he could do. Unfortunately, he didn't really have allies anywhere else. Unless. We don't have to be enemies. But they were way the fuck over in Oto, maybe even beyond at this point. It had been a few days since that scrap, and he doubted a shinobi ambassador was going to stick around for too long. But Sakura Harino was from Konoha, wasn't she? As well as that boy she had with her, the real artist, so maybe. Okay, it was a stupid idea. But if Pain could attack a whole village, he would have done it already and taken the Jinhiriki himself. Even if they ended up captured, it was still a better situation than being dead, and Konan would get medical help if only to keep her alive for information. Who knew? Maybe he could spin something about being a mole for Sakura and get some sympathy. To Konoha, then. He poured more chakra into his mount, urging it ever faster. Thankfully, there were plenty of trees here to weave through, hopefully it would slow Pain D. His mount skidded to a halt. There was a man in front of them. A man in dark robes and a swirling orange mask. Deidara had never seen him before, but there was something about him that invoked an uneasy feeling. Madara, Konan whispered, clinging to him desperately. Don't engage him. The fuck do you mean, Madara? Deidara looked to the man again. No, there was no way this weird masked dude was some ancient Uchiha legend. But as he looked at the single opening in the mask, he saw the man's eyes swirl red. Sharingan. Fuck. A clever trick, Deidara. The man spoke. Very clever. You might have succeeded, too. Nagato is quite distraught with Konan turning on him so. Not thinking clearly. Deidara saw his surroundings begin to warp around him. Genjutsu? Easy. Even if this man was Madara, he clearly didn't know Deidara's little secret. That Deidara had been training his eyes to combat the Sharingan for quite a while now. The warping ceased as he focused his chakra, and his eyes saw clearly once more. I must thank the two of you, however. The man slowly began to walk, intending to flank them. Deidara kept looking ahead, pretending he was caught in the illusion. Because of this, Nagato will no longer be hindered by any lingering thoughts of peace. He will be the perfect weapon. The perfect tool. Konan spit at the ground in front of them, clearly believing Madara was still there. Bastard! She hissed. It was you, wasn't it? You're the one who brought Danzo to Akatsuki all those years ago. You're the reason we failed. Clever indeed. But that won't help you now. Madara was next to them now, reaching out with a gloved hand toward Deidara's mount. Unfortunately, I'll be using you to further Nagato's rage. You won't have to wait long. And I have the perfect place to keep you until he's ready. Deidara got the sudden, overwhelming impression that he shouldn't let Madara touch them. He dropped 2 spider bombs in Madara's direction at the same time he urged his mount forward, narrowly avoiding the explosion behind them as the mount hit a dead sprint. Hate to thank Itaka for my life, but I guess spite's a pretty good motivator for getting stronger. Fuck Uchihas, though. He didn't have the time to think about anything Konan had just said about the masked man, nor did he give 2 shits. Right now, all he had to focus on was staying alive. Him and Konan both. It was dark and wet within the cave, rivulets of water gushing in from the rain. There were cave pools where the water eventually gathered, but that didn't make the tunnel any more pleasant to traverse. Not that Kisame minded moisture, but caves? Not really his thing. Kiri had been low to the ground, open skies, fantastic clouds to look upon. He'd fallen in love with the sky as much as the sea in his youth, and the deeper underground they went, the more he missed the clouds. He followed Itake, however, as he always did, and trusted the man to know where to go. Samehada had sensed a residue of chakra here, something that had once been vast but now long gone, buried within Konoha's earth. Guarded by a creature that looked like half a Zetsu, and, well, Kisame wasn't going to waste time unpacking that when he was already a bit confused as it was. The tunnels opened up into a larger cavern, and there he saw it. Madara Uchiha, Itachi announced with a grimace. Or what is left of him? A corpse, rotted away upon a stone chair, and a strange statue of sorts sitting behind it. There were thick vines, no, tubes? Something of the sort, perhaps once having been attached to the corpse, now lying limp at its sides. It's like a tomb. Kisame commented. He was left here, where none should have found him. None, unless they knew to look. They had tracked Madara for days from a distance, seeing the man come and go across nations, but always returning to this spot, as though there were something here that was important. Sure enough, they had found the real Madara, as well as what looked like a makeshift living quarters and a collection of reading scrolls. So who is our imposter? Kisame asked, flipping open one of the scrolls to peruse. An Uchiha for certain. Seems like you missed one. I don't miss. Itachi countered. He must have broken from the clan before my actions. An Uchiha thought dead. I have my theories. Oh. He uses but one eye. No Uchiha would willingly hinder themselves so. That implies he is missing the other. And it was well known among Konoha which Uchiha had died and given his eye up to a certain Jounin. You're saying he's the match to Kakashi Hatake's eye? Obito Uchiha. I'm willing to bet he was rescued by the aging Madara, and groomed to take up his purpose. There's also a tie to Zetsu somehow, but what it is, I know not. Kisame huffed. The name meant nothing to him, but knowing the man was not actually Madara put some feelings of his to rest. An impostor, an heir that had taken up a mantle. Powerful enough to upend Kirigakure but still needing the assistance of others for his schemes of a perfect world. He'd always wondered why the powerful Madara needed minions, but since it wasn't actually Madara. Seems the bastard survived Hashirama Senju after all. But at a cost. Kisame had picked up a small book, written in with scrawled handwriting. It was old, falling apart. The words of an ailing man who wasn't sure he'd have someone to carry on his legacy. Keep that, and gather up what else you can. It won't be long before Obito returns, and I'm not sure we want to face an Uchiha trained by Madara. Not even you. I'm handicapped, you know. As if to emphasize, Itachi let out a deep cough. We need to ensure this information gets to the right location. The right people. Right. And who would those be? You know, Kisame. You know of whom I speak. Itachi handed him another scroll, pulled from under bedsheets. It held an Uchiha crest, and Kisame wondered if Obito had filched it from the Uchiha shrine after the massacre. Is it strange to say I can sense it? He's coming for me soon, Kisame, and I will not survive him. Itachi dash. Go. Finish this mission. Do it for me. Itachi begged. Ensure my will is received. I'm not doing this for Konoha, or for the Uchiha, or for Akatsuki, I'm doing this for myself. I won't let Obito tear this world apart. And you won't either. Kisame heard the crack of thunder rumble through the cave tunnels, in time with the cold, icy grip that overtook his heart. He had known this moment was coming. Dreaded it. You won't change your mind. Itachi, for once, smiled. He put a hand on Kisame's shoulder, more gentle than a shinobi had any right to be. You're a good man, Kisame. Kisame shook his head, but pocketed the crested scroll nonetheless. He wasn't a good man. He had come to terms with that. Neither was Itachi. They were just two tools, two weapons, used and manipulated until there was nothing left of them but claws and fangs. And yet. See you on the other side, Itachi. Kisame left the Uchiha behind, not once looking back, no more considering anything but the task at hand. Even bad men could get the chance to do the right thing, and by Itachi's will, he'd see it done. Chapter 83. There was a loud hiss that came from the woman behind them, a sound that caused a shiver to run up Sakura's spine. You are acquainted. Yeah, all right, Sakura had to admit it would look pretty bad at this point if they were. The woman didn't know Haiden was a mole yet, and there was a small part of her that was pretty sure Haiden wouldn't have minded killing the Jinhiriki just for the challenge of it. And then there were the two Kumo patrollers a little ways away. We've met once before. She spoke quickly, hoping Haydn would catch on. He works for a mercenary group that is seeking the power of the Baijiu. Part of my coming here was to warn your Raikage of their intent, and to attempt to dissuade them if we found them here. Ah, don't try to dissuade me, Haydn commented, still grinning in a wolfish manner as he leaned against a nearby tree. We were just starting to have fun. The woman cursed, using a word Sakura was not familiar with, then spit and hissed in Haydn's direction. Well, at the very least, it seemed like Haydn had caught on. It was at that moment that Kakuzu appeared, all at once and so quietly that Sakura had missed him until he'd entered her visual range. For all that Haydn had spoken of the man's power, she was amazed that he was able to suppress his chakra so much, and to move so silently. She made eye contact with Kakuzu first, and she could see an intelligence there as the man assessed the situation. Of course your idiotic fighting style would attract more attention, Haydn. He spoke, in that same deep rumble that Sakura remembered from her time in Plains. You're lucky our leader wants them dead too. I already called dibs on Pinky, come on. Haydn whined. Sakura had to give him credit for staying in character. He was one hell of a mole, though, of course, she wasn't entirely unconvinced Haydn didn't want a proper spar with her when all was said and done. We've already wasted too much time. Finish the Jinhuriki, and I will deal with the rest. Crap. Things were progressing too fast. Wait. She insisted, waving her hands and stepping forward to get Kakuzu's attention. Kakuzu, we have something to tell you that you'll want to hear. All I need is a minute of your time, and if you don't like it, we can go back to killing each other. The look in Kakuzu's eyes seemed to impress that giving her a minute of his time was the last thing he wanted to do, but to his credit, he did not move from his position. Sakura didn't let herself linger. She held up one hand, attempting to show that she wasn't planning on just chucking a kunao at him after asking for a ceasefire, and with the other slowly pulled a small scroll from her pouch. She held it out so that he could see the crest embroidered on the paper. This is from Shivuki, the current leader of Takigaku, Sakura explained. She'd been sitting on this scroll for a while, after discussing Kakuzu with the man. I remembered your headband, so when I visited Taki I had to ask them what they knew about you. Shivuki told me everything. You were ordered to assassinate Hashirama Senju, and when you failed, the village, she hesitated. She was trying not to piss the man off, so how to word things. The village wrongfully punished you and stigmatized you. Hashirama Senju was one of the most powerful shinobi to have ever lived. The fact that you failed to complete your objective should not have reflected harshly on you. When I learned about your story, I, pulled some strings. She kneeled down, rolling the scroll in Kakuzu's direction. This is a full pardon and a written apology from Shivuki himself regarding Taki's conduct. It's also an offer. Taki would like to hire you as one of its shinobi once more, at triple the standard jounin pay to start. Sakura saw Haydn cover a snicker with his hand out of the corner of her eye. Yes, she had been paying attention to Haydn's musings, thank you very much, and through his eyes she'd gotten the very distinct impression that money was the one thing Kakuzu valued above all else. She didn't know what Akatsuki were paying him, but, the only way she was getting out of a fight with this man was through his wallet. Kakuzu reached down to grab the scroll, though he spared a glance towards Haydn as he did. Something amusing? He demanded. She's got you dead to rights. Haydn answered in turn, no longer able to hide the shit-eating grin on his face. The fastest way to your heart is straight into your pocketbook, and she's got a fat check, huh? Kakuzu didn't answer, but he did open the scroll, albeit warily. Sakura saw the skin on his arms blacken as he opened it, and she vaguely recalled Haydn mentioned the man had a jutsu that hardened his body to protect it from blows. Wise, she supposed, she could have booby-trapped the scroll. But the contents were legitimate, and not even Kakuzu could deny the sign seal of Shivuki himself. Amusing. Kakuzu admitted, though nothing in his eyes suggested the shinobi was actually amused. And do you have a little seal from God to get Haydn to shut up? Something like that. Sakura mused. Clever. And a pity. In another decade, you could have been worth quite a bounty. The scroll was neatly tossed back to her, and Sakura felt her heart sink as she realized Kakuzu wouldn't be so easy to sway as she'd hoped. Won't take it, huh? Damn. It was a decent offer. Kakuzu admitted. But I don't find myself forgiving my old village for their trespasses in my lifetime. That's saying something. Haiden added. Seeing as you're already old as shit. The Jinhuriki, Haiden. I'll deal with Harino. Kakuzu settled into a fighting stance, and Sakura realized that the man was, actually giving her a second to prepare herself. She didn't expect him to be honorable, but perhaps her efforts to sway him had earned some sort of respect in his eyes. She didn't want to have to fight him. But unfortunately it seemed she had no choice. She pocketed the scroll and drew her three-pronged kunao. Behind her, she heard the rustling of Gaara's sand and the unfurling of one of Sai's scrolls. There was a scraping sound too, perhaps the Jinhuriki woman sharpening her claws. In front of them, Haiden shifted, his scythe at the ready. Their eyes met, and Haiden winked. He lunged, and no doubt Kakuzu was used to Haiden charging in first, but clearly hadn't expected Haiden to swing his scythe directly into his back instead of at the Jinhuriki. Sakura immediately caught the scent of blood, saw the blades of the scythe poking out through Kakuzu's chest, and was impressed to see the man somehow still standing despite the brute of a weapon that he'd just been impaled on. Oops. Haiden said with a grin. I forgot to mention that Sakura gave me that little seal from God ages ago. You. Sakura heard Kakuzu gasp, how the hell was he still talking, and winced as Haiden removed his scythe with a visceral tug. Me, Haiden confirmed. I'm the traitor. Kind of funny, huh? You always talk about how I'm too crazy to be involved with any espionage. It was kind of touching how you always vouched for me. It's almost going to be a shame to kill a godless heathen like you. It was with an almost comically casual air that Haiden strolled over to Sakura's side, lazily spinning his scythe to bring the blades back to a ready position. It's about time the two of us got to fight side by side, he announced. And Kakuzu's been shitting on our religion long enough. 1 heart down, 4 to go. Wait, 4. Kakuzu exploded. Sakura couldn't process it as anything else at first. She saw a heaving mass of black tendrils spreading outwards, and several small white spots that she eventually realized were masks. One of them, however, was completely severed in two, and it was spit out from the rest of the mass into a pile on the ground. Somewhere deep in the mass, Sakura caught a glimpse of Kakuzu's face. Haiden. Yes. Haiden answered. I'm going to fucking kill you. There was a sudden burst of red-hot flame, blocked quickly by Gaara's sand rushing to the forefront, though despite that Sakura could feel the air heat up around her rapidly. It was probably the most powerful fire attack she'd ever seen, bar none. He's pissed. Haiden commented. No, really. Sakura groaned. And what do you mean, 4 hearts? He collects them. He gets elemental affinities out of them and extends his lifespan, and he's not going down unless you take out all of them. I was hoping to get 2 but he's moved them since I saw them last, so my aim wasn't great. Haiden moved to pull something from his cloak, his long obsidian knife. Still, I can get 1 more if you give me some cover for a minute. Sakura's eyes glanced to Haiden's scythe. Right. He'd gotten blood. Gaara, keep providing cover, she ordered, already moving to grab a flashlight from her pouch. Sai, I need you to escort the Jinhuriki home. Escort? The woman hissed. If you think I need a damned escort dash. I need you to go inform your cage that a mercenary group threatened one of his Jinhuriki. Sakura insisted. And to bring us some backup. Kakuzu isn't going to be easy to subdue. Haiden got a lucky shot, but I don't think any of us here are equipped to deal with whatever the hell he has going on with the black, tendril things. And you expect me to just forgive this one? The woman gestured to Haiden. He initiated this. Maybe he did, but we can deal with that after we've gotten Kakuzu down, right? Sai thankfully stepped forward to take the conversation from there. Right now, the best tactic is to call for aid. We don't want any of your comrades to walk into this battle without all the details. The woman spat again, but did not protest. Fine. And how do we pass this mess? With tactical verticality. Sai answered, a smile on his face as he activated his chakra ink. A large bird came into existence beneath him, and he offered a hand to the woman to help her up. She didn't take the hand, instead crawling up on her own, but Sakura was grateful that the woman could see reason. She was Akatsuki's target, and Sakura didn't yet know if there were any other members here to make their life difficult. And back up against a shinobi that was as old as her village would be more than welcomed here. Hot air changed to static, a heavy lightning current hitting Gaara's sand with such impact that it actually briefly gave way. Thankfully, Haydn was nearly finished with his ritual, skin blackening as nature energy coursed through his body, and Sai and the woman were ready to take to the air. "Just tell me when," Haydn called out. "I've been looking forward to making him suffer for months now." "Ready," Sai announced. Without any delay, Haydn stabbed his obsidian knife deep into his own chest, laughing maniacally as he did so. Though Sakura had been expecting it, it was still visceral to watch a man essentially kill himself, let alone witness him celebrate the act of doing so. There was an ebb in Kakuzu's lightning strike, as well as a guttural roar that indicated Haydn had succeeded in nailing a second heart. Sai didn't hesitate, and his bird was up in the air and away before Kakuzu could respond. That just left her, Haydn, and Gaara, but Sakura felt a little better knowing the Jinhuriki was safe and that Kumo would at least be informed about their trespassers. Whatever happened here, Kakuzu wasn't getting out of this with a victory. Haydn was lost somewhat in the haze of his ritual, but Sakura knew enough to know he'd be battle-ready after a minute to compose himself. "Can't you just keep doing that?" she questioned. "You have his blood, just keep poking until he stays down." "I don't know if that works, actually," Haydn admitted, removing the knife from his chest with a sound that made her squirm. "See, normally, when you stab a person in the heart, they stay dead. The ritual's never been used on the same person twice in a row. Also, can you, He gestured to the hole in his chest with an awkward grin, and Sakura realized he wanted her to heal him up. Great, now she got to experience Kakuzu's agonizing heartburn firsthand. "Well, if we can't put him down, we just have to delay him," she decided, stepping behind Haydn so she could place both her hands on his back. "Gaara, let's try timeout strategy and see how that goes." "Right." Gaara nodded. Timeout strategy was a new one they'd concocted, where instead of encasing his teammates in sand, he encased the enemy in sand instead to restrain them. Sakura saw Gaara begin to pull pieces of gold from his underarmor to mix with his sand. Smart. Nullifying Kakuzu's elemental chakra would make it easier to contain him. As the sand moved to surround the black mass in front of them, Sakura focused on her own power, pulling nature chakra into her body and connecting to Hida. Oh fuck. She hadn't healed a death wound since her fight against Danzo, and even then she'd been too panicked to really feel the effects of the wound. Connecting to Haydn now, she wasn't sure how the man was still standing. The connection broke as swiftly as she made it, and she gasped as the pain of a dying heart left her. "Oh come on, don't be such a wuss," Haydn griped. "I thought you'd been practicing this." "Idiot." Sakura pounded a fist against his back. "How the hell was I supposed to be practicing on death wounds? Don't you remember what I told you? This pain is Jashin's teaching. Be grateful you get to share it with me." "Well, I'm starting to think Jashin might be out of his mind." Sakura stubbornly thrust her hands onto Haydn's back again. She needed to be able to do this if they were going to work together. It was just pain, just in her head, just in her head. Shit. It was probably rushed, and she was grateful Gaara had already moved to restrain Kakuzu while she worked it out. She prided herself in her chakra control, her anatomical knowledge, her ability to soothe injury without leaving so much as scar tissue behind. She'd trained hard at the Enclave, and then here Haydn was with his stupid immortality. "Sakura, he's breaking out." Gaara's urgent voice prompted her to finish the job. She disconnected, relieved, and watched as Haydn rolled his shoulders and poked at his chest. "Decent," he admitted. "Still kind of wish you hadn't been a shitty Jushisai though. I can put the hole back if you want." "Ha. I do love that attitude of yours." As Gaara's sand was blasted off of Kakuzu, Sakura watched Haydn ready himself, distinctly keeping his body between her and Kakuzu. It was traditional Jashinist strategy. The Hagashisai acted as weapon and shield, while the Jushisai healed and kept them alive. Haydn was immortal, but Kakuzu could still tear him apart, but as long as Sakura stood, she could stitch Haydn back together. Plus, they had the advantage of Gaara's sand to act as a true shield. Against a normal shinobi, their victory would already be in the bag. But as she saw the monstrosity that was Kakuzu pour out into the woods around them, Sakura already began to doubt if they could hold the line until backup arrived. "My name is Sai. What's your name?" The best way to establish good relations was to begin with an exchange of names and pleasantries. At least, that was what Sai had read in a book he'd found on making good friendships. This woman, however, did not seem to have read the book. She glowered at him, eyes narrowed and full of distrust. She was an older woman, but still youthful, perhaps around Kakashi's age if he had to place any bets. Her eyes were cat-like with slit pupils, and even away from immediate danger her nails ended in sharp chakra-enhanced claws. She wasn't going to let down her guard around him, and Sai could respect that. He was a stranger, after all, taking her away from an even stranger situation. "I apologize for the distress our ally put you through." Sai decided to continue speaking, not particularly fond of the awkward silence. "He's been acting as a plant within Akatsuki for some time. I believe he was not intending to kill you, but rather to push you in our direction so that we could redirect Kakuzu." "Then why did he kill our patrol?" the woman demanded. "I'll be honest, I don't know." The woman huffed. "I knew Sand Shinobi were insane. This shouldn't surprise me." "We're not Sand Shinobi," Sai corrected. Had it been Gaara's sand that had set her mind? Not necessarily a bad deduction. "We're an unaligned group intending to open positive communications between villages. We came to speak with your Raikage about joining a multi-country alliance." "Wait, you?" The woman frowned. "B had mentioned this, why come to us? You have 3 others already." "I think 4 is distinctly better than 3, if the numbers are what matters." The woman went quiet, brooding for a moment before her next answer. "You think you are humorous?" "Occasionally." "Is this situation not serious to you?" "It's extremely serious. But I've found that lightening the mood helps people think more clearly," Sai replied. "I'm not sure why, but humor seems to detract from negative mindsets such as panic." "Tactical comedy?" "Precisely." To Sai's surprise, the woman nodded. "Yes. Perhaps there is wisdom there. I think I have come to understand something I did not before." "Oh. A comrade of mine employs a similar tactic. I had merely thought he was nonsensical, but perhaps he is smarter than I realized." "Someone similar to him?" Sai found himself excited at the thought. It was too bad any further relationship building would have to be put off until after Kakuzu was dealt with. "So, which direction is Kumo? You have been flying us without knowing your destination." "Well, I know it's north. I have changed my mind." "You are foolish, actually." Sai chuckled, and despite it all, the woman corrected his aim and pointed him in the direction of her village. Once the course was righted, she even blessed him with an answer to his first question. "I am Yujito." "Yujito Nii. Nice to meet you," Sai replied with a smile. "Now, let's go get back up before my friends get themselves killed." Chapter 84. They were going to die. There was something about Kakuzu beyond the fact that he collected hearts like trading cards, and Sakura was logically willing to attribute that to a good century's worth of honing his skills as a shinobi. Then she remembered that this man had attempted to take on the first Hokage in his prime and realized that maybe Kakuzu had always just been something of a monster. She'd never before seen someone with such elemental proficiency. His earth jutsu rivaled Oniki's, and that was before he combined it with other elements. Terrain. Whatever the hell he wanted it to be. Sakura found out the hard way that all her chakra control for keeping steady on surfaces was thrown out the window when it came to balancing on mud, and Jashin helped her if she tried to land on any of the water he threw out again, considering he could just run electricity through it. Oh, and normal ground. Not around Kakuzu, he could just pump his chakra through it to make jets of fire spew out of the ground like she was by a fucking volcano. And that was just the terrain Haiden had taken at this point, and Sakura had healed 4 direct lightning bolts to the chest, 2 entire body lengths worth of third-degree burns, 24 crushed bones, and 18 lacerations severe enough to need immediate attention. That was ignoring, of course, the blows that Gaara had redirected or that she'd managed to parry with her Kaze Yari. And if any of the three of them got remotely close enough to land a counter blow, Kakuzu simply hardened his skin with that strange technique of his so that any sort of blade just bounced right off. Sakura was used to luck being on her side, finding ways out of situations in their darkest moments, Jashin intervening when she needed it most. For Kakuzu, there wasn't any luck. She couldn't beat him. His hardening technique was earth element based, her sensing jutsu confirmed that early on. And while Gaara could nullify techniques with his gold sand, Kakuzu learned quickly, and now used his bizarre body threads to keep the sand at bay from his actual body. If they managed to restrain him, it really would be luck, and so far the only luck on their side was that Haiden had managed to get 2 cheap shots in before the fight began. "We need lightning jutsu," Sakura muttered to herself, tapping her palm to Haiden's back for what felt like the 100th time. She realized now how Haiden was able to take so many death blows without going crazy. At a certain point, her brain had shifted focus. Oh, the pain was there, and if she thought about it for too long her body threatened to give out. But she couldn't afford that, so instead Sakura compartmentalized. Maybe having an inner personality all those years wasn't such a bad exercise after all. "Lightning jutsu," she repeated. "Strong enough to nullify his armor. But they also need to be quick enough to dodge everything else." "What, you don't have any lightning up your sleeve?" "Earth and water," Sakura reminded Haiden. "And you could afford to learn an actual jutsu too, you know that." "Fuck jutsu, I'm immortal. And now look where we're dash." Further protests were cut short by another wave of fire slamming against Gaara's sand. Even with the gold nullification, the heat from the flame was causing sweat to pour down her face. She just couldn't understand how someone without a literal Baijuyu powering them could make a flame that intense. Not even Sasuke's fire burned that hot. And maybe if she had stronger water jutsu she could have countered it, but "I'm thinking of letting Shukaku take control." That definitely wasn't something Gaara offered lightly. Not that Shukaku was really a danger to them anymore, but if Shukaku's power was frontline, that meant Gaara would be putting less towards defending them. Higher offensive, at a cost. "It's probably the only way to throw him off his rhythm," Sakura admitted. "Maybe it will jar him enough to let one of us get a hit in. But we probably won't be able to last very long without you keeping up walls, so we do it on our first try or we don't do it at all." "He was hired to take on a fucking Jinhiriki," Haiden reminded them. "He's probably expecting it, the bastard. Then we need to try something he'll never expect to catch him off guard." And Sakura knew, right then and there, exactly what she needed to do. "I need to distract him. I'm the healer, and the leader of the Neutrality Project. If he can take me out, he will. If he's focused on reaching me, he won't be focused on Shukaku. If you two can even get one more of his hearts, it might be enough to persuade him to rout." The look on Gaara's face told her all she needed to know about the idea, but he didn't protest. It was already desperate enough that they were relying on Shukaku, and if Shukaku moved quickly enough she wouldn't have to be at risk for long. "And what if he ignores you completely and goes for one of us instead?" "Then I get the kill shot," Sakura answered. "Essentially our plan is divide and conquer. He may be throwing out jutsu left and right, but he's only got one set of eyes. Plus, he's using those extra hearts to attack. They're like puppets, weirdly, but unlike an actual puppet, if we get a kill shot, it will stay dead. It's a big risk using them, we just need to capitalize on that risk. So maybe it would be better if we completely split up," Haiden retorted. "Go one-on-one with each of the hearts so he can't do any of those fucked up combos. While running the risk he sends 3 after one of us instead. If he does that, try to restrain the main body," Sakura offered. "Maybe we can't get through that armor jutsu, but if he's restrained, he'll have to bring back the heart puppets to assist, and you can go for the kill as they return." Another massive burst of fire brought their planning to an end. Kakuzu was starting to hit hard, and Gaara's wall wouldn't last much longer. Now or never. Focus chakra to my feet. Is Shukaku ready? What kind of a dumbass question is that? It had been a while since she'd heard Shikaku's rumbling voice echoing through Gaara's own. It still made her shiver, but he was as much a part of the team now as any of them were. Sakura trusted the Tanuki. Well, in this case, she had to. Now, all she had to do was dodge Kakuzu on her own for an undetermined amount of time. She readied her spear, a last resort if something came her way she wasn't fast enough to run around. Then, with a push, she began to run. There was a small lull in Kakuzu's onslaught as she ran, no doubt him processing just what exactly her new strategy was. It was an obvious distraction, he probably knew it was a distraction, but he took the bait anyway, and Sakura could see one of those eerie writhing masks head her way. The one that primarily shot lightning, by the look of it. The other heart puppet, the flame one, stayed behind. So they'd divided them, and that meant. Sakura felt the hair on her body stand on end. A faint metallic taste seemed to hit her tongue, and without thinking, she urged herself forward just in time as an enormous bolt of lightning split the tree behind her. Kakuzu definitely wasn't screwing around with her. He wanted her dead. And here she was running around in metal shinobi armor, a lightning rod on legs. She was starting to question why IWA relied so much on metal for their protection. Maybe some sort of seal-enforced leather would have been better, or at this point not wearing anything. Another crack sounded behind her, a bit further back. Sakura risked a glance backwards. The twisted masked being was falling behind. Had Kakuzu decided not to pursue her after all? Some instinct within her flared, and she skidded to a halt right as Kakuzu's main body suddenly shot forward, slamming an enhanced fist into a tree that she had been about to reach. Ah, so he had decided to come for her, personally. I'll admit, Harano, you've proven far more prepared than any of us expected. Despite the fact that he'd been busy spewing out S-rank jutsu for the better part of the past 20 minutes, Kakuzu had an almost casual air as he straightened up and turned towards her. He didn't look like he'd even broken a sweat. Using hidden as a mole was clever. Nobody thought him smart enough for espionage. But before I kill you, you'll tell me how you communicated. It wasn't by physical message, so it has to be jutsu. You will tell me about this jutsu. Would you believe me if I told you it was the will of Jashin? Sakura chuckled nervously, taking a step back just to put a little more distance between her and him. Your meager attempt at humor is wasted on me, Harano. The jutsu, or I will make this last longer than you'd like. Sakura suddenly found herself wishing Sai was here. He'd know a better quip for the situation. All she could do in the face of this titan was just grip her Kazayari tight and, ironically, pray. Jashin had placed her trust in her, had chosen her, and now she was starting to think this was all for nothing. If she couldn't even beat Kakuzu, how could she hope to defeat Pain? The man called A was truly at a loss. There'd been another killing. One of the daimyo's brats, not the heir thankfully, but the death of the second eldest son was enough to send the man into a frenzy. Kyomagakure relied on the connections and funding of the daimyo to maintain their village, and if the man was upset, the village would be too. He'd known their unknown killer was a lunatic, but to anger the daimyo. Foolish. If A ever got his hands on the culprit, he'd take his time showing his displeasure. The murder was gruesome. A had survived war, which meant he had more than enough stomach for it, but the young genin who had first been called to the scene hadn't been able to last in the room for more than a few minutes. It wasn't just a death, not really. It had been drawn out. Multiple breaks in bones had indicated the man had suffered before his death, really suffered. A sadist killer. There were multiple stab wounds, none but one anywhere near lethal. Just there to cause pain. And then there was the blood on the ground, the strange symbol. A circle with a triangle. He'd never seen such a symbol in his lifetime. The mark of some new organization, perhaps. A had initially wondered briefly if it was tied to the Akatsuki, but they wore distinct red clouds, not anything like this. Yujito swore up and down that someone had infiltrated the village, and he believed her. Her nose never failed. But they hadn't turned up the rat yet, and if this kept up. 10 murders in the past month. 10 unacceptable deaths. I scoffed aloud, but committed the scene to memory. There had to be a clue. Something beyond the obvious. Some connection between the murders, beyond that simple. The victims were all people of influence. Nobles, high-leveled jounin, wealthy merchants. The killer was trying to cause distress among people of power. And they were strong enough to handle jounin. Lord Raikage. The words of one of his bodyguards distracted him from his thoughts. He turned to face the man, tilting his head to acknowledge him. Yujito has returned to the village with an outsider. Someone claiming to be an ambassador. Yujito was accosted by the Akatsuki, and they're still within our borders to the south. I didn't need much more than that to rush from the building. The murder could wait. He pulled out a small device, a hand radio commissioned within Otagakur, and turned it onto a specific frequency. Yujito. Raikage. The woman's rasping voice answered. Akatsuki is dash. Are you harmed? No. Yujito's voice softened slightly. The ambassadors stepped in. Two of them are still engaging. These wouldn't happen to be the ambassadors be kept raving about. One and the same. Detain the one who brought you here at Cliffside. I let his voice switch into the coded language of his ancestors. Each of their shinobi facilities was named in it, to prevent any outsider from knowing where things were or what they had within their borders. The language was supposedly the language of the place their people had come from across the sea. There were none who knew what lay beyond the ocean, but A had believed since he was young that there were shinobi there, his long-lost cousins, with their own problems far on the other side of the world. Sometimes he even envied them. Then what? Yujito prompted. Wait. I'll return with the other two momentarily. And Akatsuki. I'll bring their heads as a gift. Chapter 85. It happened so quickly that Sakura almost couldn't believe she was awake, and not in some dream. One moment, she was parrying Kakuzu's blows, using Earth Jutsu to wall herself away from Kakuzu's lightning and redirect it away from her body. Earth Jutsu was weak to lightning, but Onaki had thankfully shown her a couple techniques for redirecting it should the need ever arise. And boy was she grateful for his foresight. Make high pillars to attract the lightning. Weave towards and away from trees to encourage the lightning to strike the taller object. Most importantly, never stop moving. Lightning attracted, but it was still at the whim and aim of the user, and Kakuzu was not a native lightning user. Skilled as he was, Sakura was beginning to learn that even Sasuke had a better grip on the art than him. Kakuzu's hearts gave him control over elements, but not mastery. Not to say, of course, that Kakuzu was weak. Far from it. It was more that, despite the century of honing his techniques, he was still limited by his true body's alignment. Kakuzu was earth-focused, like she was, running on borrowed power and not natural talent. It was the only reason she was still alive. But even she was beginning to doubt she'd last much longer when it happened. That familiar metal tang built in her mouth, and she prepared to dodge, but realized at the last minute that Kakuzu wasn't charging a jutsu. Instead, all at once, the world lit up around her in a brilliant flash of blue. With a crack that caused her ears to ring, he appeared, wreathed in lightning chakra to such an extent that Sakura immediately ducked back several steps. The man was dangerous by chakra alone, notwithstanding that a glance at him revealed pure muscle, arms that might have been as thick as her waist, a man that stood at least a foot taller than her. Shinobi wasn't a good enough word. This man was a warrior. He was facing Kakuzu, but he spoke aloud to Sakura as his chakra settled, dispersing sparks into the air. Ambassador Harano. At your service. Sakura hastily replied. I thank you for ensuring the safety of my shinobi. I will take it from here. My shinobi? It hit her all at once, this had to be the Raikage. Nobody else could command such intimidating chakra, not unless they were Jinhiriki. She'd sent Sai to get help and somehow he'd managed to get the fucking Raikage to come personally, or perhaps the Cloud Jinhiriki had spoken on their behalf. Either way, Sakura had never felt so grateful. Let me know if I can assist. She offered, but it was abundantly clear from her voice that she was exhausted from the effort of managing Kakuzu. Any help she could give would be sparse at best. It didn't seem to matter to the Raikage, for with a snap of chakra he was at Kakuzu's position, arm outstretched so that he slammed into Kakuzu's neck with the inside of his elbow. Lariat. There was a crack of force, and Sakura saw Kakuzu's eyes widen in shock as the black armor on his skin broke from not just the sheer power of the technique, but from the incredible burst of lightning chakra. Yes, there was no doubt from this technique alone, this was the Raikage. She didn't know much, but the lariat technique was infamous, as was the Raikage's mastery of lightning chakra. Ask and Jashin answers, I did pray for a way to get past that armor of his. That was the last she saw of Kakuzu, for the moment anyway, as the force of the technique sent the shinobi flying backwards into the woods so rapidly that Sakura couldn't even see where he landed. She heard the Raikage huff, a sort of satisfied sound that seemed to represent pleasure in a hit well landed. You're a lifesaver, Lord Raikage. Sakura admitted as she folded up Kazei Yari. Kakuzu is well over a century old, and that armor technique was proving difficult. The Raikage snorted at that. I got a letter the other day. He told her, wiping a small bit of sweat from his shoulder as he turned to face her. Something about Orochimaru stepping down as Otokage, something about, please hear out Sakura Harino, from a certain Uzum. He suddenly froze, his eyes lingering on a spot at Sakura's neck. Instinctively, she reached up, realizing that he was looking at her Jashin medallion. This? She questioned, holding it out slightly so that the man could see. Well, it's a religious token. You may or may not have heard of Jashinism. If you want I could dash. Before she knew it, a hand was at her throat, and the Raikage was looking down at her with murderous intent. Tell me why I shouldn't kill you right here and now, murderer. Gaara knew something had changed when the masked heart pursuing him suddenly pulled back, dashing off into the woods before he had time to even consider pursuing. Something had happened to Kakuzu's main body to cause the heart to retreat. Had Sakura managed to get an edge? He felt a small burst of pride as he turned back in the direction she'd fled. Of course she'd found a way. It was Sakura, after all. No matter what had happened, she'd always found a way. He reconnected with Haiden first, who was holding his own torn right arm in his left hand. Bastard nailed me, he told Gaara with a grin. But he got scared and ran off. Think Pinky got the killing blow? Kind of sad I missed it. That still leaves 2 hearts. Gaara countered. True, but at least we have a minute to breathe. And 1 less heart to have to juggle. Haiden spit what looked like a bloodied tooth from his mouth before he wiped his lips with his arm. You know, I gotta admit, I never thought any group would be able to take Kakuzu on. He's one tough piece of work. You sound like you almost admire him. I mean, yeah, of course I do. Can you imagine if he dedicated himself to Jashin as much as he dedicated himself to money? Like, shit, I'd probably be out of a job. Haiden shrugged. This fight isn't really that personal. As much as I bitch at the heathen, I kinda wish he'd taken Pinky's offer. A man that old is too proud to let a child entice him. Shukaku spoke through Gaara, which was, still jarring, even after all this time, to have his mouth move without him prompting it. And we're delaying too long. Even 2 hearts will be too much for Sakura to handle. Right, let's go. I need my arm back on anyway. They ran, conserving energy but still maintaining haste as they scanned the woods for signs of Sakura's fight. Lightning-struck trees indicated they were getting closer, until suddenly Gaara caught a glimpse of 2 people in the trees. An unfamiliar man, dark-skinned and muscular, was gripping Sakura by the throat. Kakuzu nowhere in sight. Still, Gaara saw red, sand writhing around him to defend before he was briefly halted by Haiden calling out. Oi, asshole, put her down. Haiden lunged forward, and Gaara saw the man twitch just enough to indicate that Haiden had startled him. He let go of Sakura as Haiden, had he just thrown his severed arm at the man? Effective, certainly, as the man ducked to avoid it, giving Haiden ample time to draw his scythe and stand between him and the now coughing Sakura. Gaara moved as well, ready to defend if the man charged again. Wait, Haiden, Sakura managed to gasp. He's not an enemy. Don't toy with me, girl. I've tracked 10 deaths over the past month, and each of the crime scenes has that symbol drawn all over them. The man pointed towards Haiden's necklace. Not only that, now you've got Akatsuki defending you. I'm a mole, by Jashin, I'll take the dem coat off if it makes it easier. Haydn groaned before shrugging off the tattered cloak. As for crime scenes, the fuck are you even talking about? Kakuzu didn't let me kill shit the whole time I've been here. And Sakura has been in Otagakure. We have alibis. Gaara spoke up. Just ask Lord Orochimaru, or Karen Uzumaki. The man thought for a second, and to Gaara's surprise, he actually nodded. Right. Harano's got an alibi. But you sure don't. He pointed to Haydn. And unless you've got something better than the word of a man I just sent to the other side of the woods, I'll be bringing you in. Well. Haydn, you haven't killed anyone since you've been in Lightning Country. Sakura confirmed. Gaara helped her to her feet, but noticed she was still leaning on him for support. She looked exhausted. Had this man rescued her from Kakuzu? I swear to Jashin I haven't touched anyone other than that Jinhira chick, and even then I barely even got a chance before you stepped in. Cross my fucking heart. One's word isn't evidence. The man countered. And you're the first two I've seen carrying that symbol since the murders began. Gaara felt Sakura take a deep breath. Eventually, she nodded. Then arrest us both. Wait, what? Sakura dash. We're ambassadors, Haydn. We're not here to cause an international incident by resisting the rakeage. We're innocent and we know it, so let's comply and clear things up. Shit, the rakeage was the man in front of them? Gaara felt himself tense. No, they definitely didn't need to piss him off, and the man's lightning jutsu would most definitely be more than a match for his sand anyway. Fucking peace path. Haydn rolled his eyes, but to Gaara's surprise he actually listened to Sakura, sheathing his scythe onto his back. Can you at least let her put my arm back on before we go in? And what about Kakuzu? If you're referring to the man I just sent to the other side of the woods, I know no man that can survive my lariat. I'm not doubting you got the hit, but the guy's got 2 more lives left in him. He might be coming back for round 2. At that prompting, Sakura shakily put her hands together. Gaara recognized the hand sign for her sensing jutsu, and though the rakeage tensed at the motion, Sakura spoke to put him at ease. Sensing jutsu. I'll see if he's returning. The rakeage settled, and Gaara watched as Sakura sent out a pulse of her chakra. He's retreating. She told them with a relieved smile. I don't think he's stupid enough to try and face the rakeage again after that hit, that. Lariat, you called it. The word sounded strange, like it was from an entirely different language. Sakura struggled a bit on the pronunciation, but Gaara noted that it seemed to bring a small smile to the rakeage's face that she'd tried. Lariat. He repeated. It is the signature technique of the rakeage of this village. And what I'll turn on you should you try and run before these murders are solved. Don't worry. Sakura promised him. We're not going anywhere. Gaara and Sai looked on at the scene from the other side of the glass. Sakura and Haydn had both been restrained with chakra-suppressing seals, as well as rope to tie their hands behind their backs. It had taken a lot out of Gaara to let them handle Sakura in such a way, but Sakura was right, they were innocent, and Haydn, well, Gaara would have initially chalked any Jashin-style killing to him, but Sakura believed in his innocence, and that was all Gaara needed. You maintain that you were not involved in any of the killings done in this village. The rakeage confirmed aloud. You maintain that those of your order would have no reason to kill in this village. And yet I have 10 crime scenes with your order's symbol and no explanation as to why. Each of the deaths were high-profile, targeted disorder among my village's hierarchy. We are on the brink of civil war. The daimyo fears for his life and questions my shinobi's competence. My shinobi are on edge looking for an enemy they cannot see or track. You are the first clue I have to this mystery and yet you claim you can tell me nothing. I can offer some speculation, I think. Sakura spoke back, her voice slightly muffled by the glass of her cell. Someone knew that my group would be coming to you to discuss our international alliance, someone who, I suppose also knew of the Jashinists. Maybe they hoped to turn you against me by committing murders in such a way that you would inevitably have tied them to me when you saw my amulet. Haydn, too, but the thing is, I don't know who would know that or have cause to do so outside of Akatsuki, and they still don't know that Haydn is my mole. Well, they'd know now, Gaara thought to himself, but that didn't change the narrative. You claim you have been framed, then. The Raikage replied. I can't deny that narrative. Right now, I can't confirm or deny any narrative. You've been compliant, which is the only reason you're still alive and in such good condition. But the fact remains that I have deaths on my hands and I need to know why. Then let us offer our services. Sai spoke up, stepping forward so he could be within the Raikage's vision. As much as you, we're interested in who would want to frame our group for murder. Yes, and it's our mantra to be a neutral group that works for the benefit of all villages. Sakura insisted. Maybe we can be the extra force you need to get answers. Maybe. The Raikage admitted. But I won't let you two from this cell. Right now, you're collateral. If I find any definitive evidence that points to your group being at the root of this, I will see justice done. So you leave it to us. Sai offered. Gaara and I will be more than capable of assisting. I will give you a week. The Raikage decided. And you will be under watch by my shinobi for the duration of your stay. Any funny business, I will give them standing orders to eliminate you. Gaara simply nodded. It was a pragmatic choice. The Raikage had a subtle air of desperation to him. He needed answers, and he was willing to trust strangers to get any sort of edge. But a good leader wouldn't endanger his village, and it was only natural they'd be assigned babysitters for their stay, until they'd proven their innocence. And yet, Gaara did feel a strange sort of confidence. He'd trained for this sort of thing, after all, under the tutelage of the Tanuki. Looking for a murderer, hidden amongst the people of Cloud, why, that couldn't be too much more difficult than the Tanuki trials, could it? A week will be more than enough. Gaara promised. And being under watch is no issue for either of us. That's what I like to hear. The Raikage put a finger to his ear, activating a small device that Gaara recognized as a radio transmitter, not unlike the ones used in Otagakure. Karen had mentioned active trade between the two villages, and it wasn't difficult to see how Kumo had benefited from that exchange. Yujito. Get in here. A moment passed, and then Gaara felt a sudden weight on his shoulders. A tall man, of similar build and look to the Raikage, had put an arm around both of their shoulders. He was grinning from ear to ear, and even through the man's sunglasses, Gaara could tell there was a happy light in his eyes. Welcome to Kumo, ambassador friends. Let's work together and tie up loose ends. Behind him, Gaara glimpsed the woman from before, the Jinhiriki with the stern glare. She said nothing, but Gaara could almost feel her energy writhe at the sight of the other man, acting so familiar with him and Sai. And then it hit him, all at once, a subdued energy at the moment, but he'd recognize it anywhere after interacting with 4 other Jinhiriki prior. The man called B was a Jinhiriki too. So this is your host, Jyoki? Shikaku spoke through him. B's grin faltered for only a moment as he processed the question. But then his grin returned, and his hand squeezed Gaara's shoulder. I'd heard Ichibai was part of the show. It's a pleasure to meet ya, don't ya know? B, stop procrastinating. Yujito finally spoke. We have a rat to chase, and we're wasting daylight. Right on, right on. B withdrew from the embrace before gently pushing Gaara and Sai towards the door. Let's ditch this joint. I can see you all are, to the point. Sai prompted. Behind them, Gaara saw the Raikage roll his eyes, but B himself just laughed and laughed. You know how to rhyme? Then we'll get along just fine. Check the description for the links to the author.